All right, guys. So what we're going to do today is we're going to kind of get caught up on the steps that we need to follow to write our text-dependent analysis, or our TDA, or you might hear me refer to it as our ta-da. So what you're going to need to do first and foremost is you're going to need to get out your copy of this worksheet. Most of you guys should have this in your writing folder. If for whatever reason you don't have this in your writing folder, I do think I have one class, my third academic, that didn't get to this point to analyze our TDA prompt altogether, or even write down the 7 steps of the writing process. Either way, get out this paper. It'll be in your writing folder, or I will provide you with a copy of it if you don't have one. But we're just going to really quickly review what the 7 steps that we need to follow are, and then we're going to go from there. So looking at this first line, lines 1 through 7, we are going to list out the steps that we need to follow in order to be successful for our TDA. This is something that I went over with you guys in class. I asked you to think, okay, pretend I put a text-dependent analysis down in front of you right now. What would you do? What materials would you have? Where would you start? And a lot of you said, oh, we would have text that we would have to read. We would have reading passages, and we would have a question, and we would have scrap paper. And all of those answers are absolutely correct. And all we have to do now is think, okay, these are the things that I have: passages, a question, scrap paper, pencil. What do I do with those things? When you start a TDA, the very first thing that you want to do is you want to read all of the texts that they give you. I know a lot of people are like, oh, you want to read the question first. You want to analyze the question first. And that is okay to do. I'm not telling you can't read the question first or you can't analyze the question first. But remember, a TDA is first and foremost a reading test. It's not a writing test. It's to see how can you take these texts and bring them together in some kind of way and answer a question. What parallels, what comparisons, what common things do they have to answer a question? So in our case, for this very first TDA that we're doing, we're only focusing on one text, and it's going to be for honors, The Monsters Who Dwell on Maple Street. And for my grade level kiddos, we did Sorry, Wrong Number. Now, you've already read that text. Arguably, that is going to be our first step. So regardless if it's 1 text, 2 texts, or 5 texts, it's not ever going to be 5, but pretend it was. The very first step that you would follow and what you need to write on this number 1 line is read all texts provided. Okay? The second thing that you're going to need to do is what some people may argue should be the first thing, which is analyze the question. Don't just read the question. It does you no good to read the question if you don't understand what the question's asking you. Analyze means break down. So when you're analyzing the prompt, analyzing the question, you are essentially looking at that question and you're saying, okay, what is this asking me to do? Are there terms in here that I don't understand? Is the prompt really wordy? Do they give me a lot of information and only ask one very short question at the end? You're going to read that prompt line by line, and I'll show you how to do that in a second. You're going to read that prompt line by line, and you're actually going to make notations on your paper on that prompt, and you're going to break down that prompt. You're going to pull out all the pieces of unnecessary information that you don't really need, and you're going to figure out what specifically is this asking me to do, okay? So number 1 is read all text provided. Number 2 is analyze the prompt. Once we've read all of our text, we've analyzed the question, we know what we're being asked, we know what text we have to work with, what we're going to do next is we're going to begin to develop an outline or a graphic organizer for our TDA. You can't just sit down and start writing a TDA. You have to have a plan. You have to draw out that plan. So you're actually going to create a physical graphic organizer on paper where you're going to record your ideas that you're going to end up using in that essay later on. Okay, and that graphic organizer should guide you from start to finish with that text-dependent analysis. Okay, so step 1, read all text provided. Step 2, analyze the prompt. Step 3, create a graphic organizer. Once you have a graphic organizer, you're in a spot where you're ready to start writing your TDA. And we don't just write our TDA and say, all right, cool, we're done. First draft is the only draft. we start a rough draft, which is just a rough sketch of what we want our essay to be. And from the beginning of that rough draft all the way until the end of your final version, it's going to change, maybe minimally, maybe dramatically. So your rough draft is just kind of that first working piece. Okay. It's going to be, how do you want your introduction to look? How are your body paragraphs going to look? What's your conclusion going to look like? Okay. And then once you write that rough draft, like I said, a rough draft or a first draft is not the final draft. You move over into editing and revising. And we don't just edit and revise by saying, okay, I read through it, I put a comma where a comma should go. You're going to look at the SC Ready writing rubric, and we're going to break that down later on this week. But you're going to look at that SC Ready writing rubric, and you're going to make sure that you have done everything that rubric has told you to do. Again, TDAs are not necessarily writing tests. They're actually reading tests. And if you misspell something or your grammar's not so great, at the end of the day, that's not really going to impact your score very much. Your ideas and the way you communicate those ideas about what you have read is how you're going to be scored. That's what we're really looking for. And a big part of that is, did you read the rubric? Did you know what you were being asked to do? Not just in the prompt, but in the expectations of how you're being graded. I have a rubric that I use as a teacher. When, administrators come into my room or curriculum specialists come into my room, I know the things that they're looking for. I know that the things that they're looking for are what make a quality lesson. And every single time I write out my lesson plans, I make sure I address all parts of that rubric, because one, I want you guys to be successful. And two, if I know that that's the rubric that they're going to be using when they come into my room, I'm absolutely going to make sure that I'm addressing all of those pieces. Okay. We all want the highest score that we can possibly get, right? So that's what you want to do, is you want to use that SC Ready writing rubric to your advantage. If you know how they're going to grade you, if you know how they're going to give you points, you know how to get the maximum amount of points by just following the rules of that rubric. Okay. And again, we're going to talk about that rubric later on this week. The next thing you're going to do after you edit and revise, you've made all the changes that you need to make, you are going to type a final draft. Now for SC Ready, you're going to type it in the SC Ready test. When we do school-wide TDAs, if we do those this year, you might have to do it in a Google Doc. However they decide that you need to type it, or wherever they decide you need to type it. But if it's for me, if it's a TDA that I assign, like this one that I've assigned to you guys, you're going to end up typing it like you do every other piece of writing in my class in no red ink. Okay, so just to recap really, really quickly. Step 1, read all of the text that they've given you. Step 2, analyze the prompt. Step 3, create a graphic organizer. Step 4, you're going to write a rough draft. Step 5, you're going to edit and revise that rough draft, and you're going to use the SC Ready writing rubric to make those edits and revisions. Step 6 is type your final version. Once you've made all the changes that you need to make, you got to clean it up. You're going to make it look nice, neat, and pretty, and you're going to type it in wherever they tell you to type it. For this TDA, for example, it's going to be typed in no red ink. And then once you type it, you're not just done, poof, click, turn it in. You have to proofread it. So please make sure that once you type that last sentence, you put that last period mark in your very last sentence of your very last paragraph. Please make sure you go back and you read that honestly from beginning to end. If it helps you to have somebody else read it so that maybe a new pair of eyes can catch something that you didn't catch while we're in the process of learning how to write a TDA, I'm totally okay with that. Obviously, that's not going to work for SC Ready, but at least for now, while we're still learning how to do this, that's definitely an option that you have. And I'm happy to read it if it's early enough in the TDA writing process. But if it's like the final due date, last day, I'm not going to be able to read every single person's in a class period. So if you ask me towards the end, I'm going to say no. And it's just because I want to be fair to everybody. If I don't have enough time to read everybody's, then I can't read yours on that last day either. But the good news is for this TDA that we're doing it step by step together 100% of the way. So what I have is what you should have. Okay. So last step, like I said, we don't just click submit. We proofread. We very carefully from beginning to end, we go over it. Okay. So these are the 7 steps to the to be successful when writing a TDA. You are not going to hear the end of these 7 steps between now and the end of the year. I'm going to talk about them all of the time. So please make sure that you commit these to memory. It's a fairly reasonable process, but please make sure that you know all 7 of these steps.